Hello there, it's the 13th of July. Welcome along to Renew Every Morning. I'm Paul Anderson-Walsh and I'm thrilled as always that you're with me. We are in our series of postcards of grace and we're taking characters from scripture. Some of them are famous, some of them are not so famous, some of them are hidden. But today's character is one you'll be familiar with. But his story has a nice twist, and that's the story of Joseph of Arimathea. And he's the man who gave his grave to Jesus. Now, it's quite a nice way of thinking about him, isn't it? The one who went to the grave for us needed a grave to go to and needed a grave to be raised from. And imagine being the person that gave up your grave for him. It's quite extraordinary, isn't it? Now, Joseph of Arimathea is an interesting character. He's quite a secretive character in some ways, quite a hidden character. But his name means a man of faith. And so we're going to see something quite strong here. And he's a man who followed Jesus, but he follows Jesus in secret. You'll know, of course, that he's a friend of Nicodemus. And there's obviously some turmoil, some consternation going on within the religious community, the religious profession. He's part of the Sanhedrin, the ruling council, of course, and that council had been the same council that had condemned Jesus. But he's kind of struggling with it, obviously, because he's seeing and understanding something, and goodness knows, the fingerprints of the divine are all over everything that Jesus does. So it's obvious in hindsight to us who he is, but it was incredible how much denial there was of the reality of who the Christ was. And of course, you and I both know very well, right, that Jesus was killed for job security, because the fact of the matter is, if the Sanhedrin, if the religious people were to accept the Christ for who he is, that was the end of their business. But this man, in part of this ruling council, he obviously doesn't agree with the decision that's been made, but he keeps quiet, and he keeps quiet until the very end. And oftentimes, you and I can be in situations where we don't agree with the decisions that have been made by our leaders. And then the question really becomes as to whether or not we have the voice to speak them out. And that is a really interesting challenge. Sometimes that happens in the moment and we're asked to give our opinion and we choose not to give it. Someone says, "What do you think, Paul?" And someone senior to me says, "What do you think, Paul?" And what Paul thinks is, well, what do I think they'll think if I tell them what I think? So actually, what do I think they want me to think? That'll be the answer I give. And a lot of us live in that space, don't we? Live in that very curious world. But that's a world that Joseph of Arimathea lived in but broke out of, which is very important. Because when most of the disciples had fled, remember, Jesus is dead. As far as the Sanhedrin is concerned, as far as the religious community is concerned, that is the end of it. Everybody had fled for their lives. But now, this is the moment that Joseph decides that he's going to stand up. He goes to Pilate and he says to Pilate, he begged him actually, he asked him boldly, he says to him, "I want to take the body of Jesus." Now, this is an incredible risk, and it's also a great act of reverence. Interestingly, it wasn't uncommon for people to go and claim the bodies of people that have been crucified, because if they weren't claimed, literally the bodies would just be thrown in the refuse tip. And of course, that's the whole Gehenna conversation, which is where we get the idea of hell from, by the way. But he goes and he says, "No, I want you to give me the body of Jesus." Now imagine that. He wasn't able to stand up in public when Jesus was alive, but now Jesus is dead. He knows surely that there's more to this. This story's not finished, and now this is his role in the story. Imagine that you don't have a big role during Jesus' lifetime. He wasn't there when Jesus was performing all the miracles. He didn't do what the 12 did, but now the 12 are on the run. He's the one that steps into the scene. And maybe that's part of your story. Maybe you're not the one that's in that main in-group, but actually when the moment comes and nobody's there, you're the one that steps into that gap. And he comes and he lays Jesus in a new tomb. It was a tomb that had never been used before. It fulfills one of the prophecies from Isaiah 53, I think it is. It says, "And they laid him in a rich man's tomb." And it was that's an important fulfillment, because there's all of these little fragments, all of these little evidences in Scripture have to be fulfilled. They're all proofs, if you like. So it's a borrowed tomb. Now the beautiful thing about this tomb is it only needed to be borrowed because it wasn't going to be a permanent one. So imagine, just think about that for a second. Joseph of Arimathea was able to lend Jesus his like a kind of like an Airbnb. It was almost like he was saying, well, I don't need it yet. I can lend it to Jesus, and by the time I need it, Jesus would have moved out. So you just get your mind around that. It's just brilliant. So it doesn't need to be a permanent dwelling place for Jesus. It's only going to be a temporary one because the resurrection is coming. And maybe, just maybe, Joseph of Arimathea knew that. Now, he wasn't alone. Remember, he comes with Nicodemus. And this is where we saw that story a few days ago. And this is where you see that lovely coming together of these two men that were part of this secret society of Jesus, now become this very public owners and community of Jesus. And he joined him, and Nicodemus, so Joseph gives him the grave, Nicodemus brings the spices. And these two kind of silent followers step out of the shadows and come forward when it matters most. I mean, it's just beautiful. And in so doing, what happens is, I've said that verse in Isaiah, by this very act, we now see that this is fulfilled. He says in Isaiah 53, he was assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death. It's really nice. Now, interestingly, according to tradition, and let me just finish this little story by telling you something rather cute. According to tradition, Joseph of Arimathea later travelled to Britain, to my country, bringing the message of Jesus with him. Some say that he planted his staff in Glastonbury, where a tree sprung up, and others call that, it's called the Glastonbury tree, and literally it flowered in Glastonbury, so they say. Others say he founded the Christian church in England. Well, I'm just kind of interested about this Glastonbury tree, because I think that might be quite an interesting thing to say. So Joseph's legacy, if you like, stretches from giving up his tomb in Jerusalem to planting the gospel in the West. So the man who gave his grave to Jesus becomes the quiet apostle of the resurrection. And in Glastonbury, right to this very day, we see that now played out in festival form. So I just leave you with this idea that this man's legacy stretches from the grave to a rave. The idea that you could give someone your grave in Jerusalem and end up with a rave in England is pretty amazing. Anyway, for sure, there are many of us who are secret lovers of Christ. And there comes a time when those of us who have been loving and believing in secret need to come to the fore. And if that moment is yours, be encouraged, because just be encouraged, because when the time is right, you'll know what to do, and the legacy will be yours forever. All right, bless you. Great to be with you. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye for now.